welcome again to an episode of Latin Pronunciation and Conversation. So, this time I want to talk about family names as well as the dative of possession. And this is a big sounding grammar term, the dative of possession, which makes it sound somewhat intimidating, as do many, if not most, of the grammatical terms, I'd say, probably in Latin. But we're going to hopefully demystify some of that because it's actually wonderfully easy. So in fact, we're going to talk about nuclear family names, we're going to talk about some other things, and we're going to take advantage of the Downton Abbey family tree in order to describe and actually use it in practice a little bit. So, we have the word for sister, which is soror, and I happen to have a soror. Well, how would I say that? I have a sister. Well, the way that would be most literally like English, habeo sorore, habeo sorore, habeo sorore. So I have a sister. Now, when we use the verb to have, habere, habeo, the result is that we're going to have to use the accusative case. And the accusative case is a way to change the ending of nouns and adjectives and pronouns in order to explain the relationship of that noun in the sentence. Now, English, as well as a lot of other Western European languages, tend to use word order instead of actually using case endings. However, pronouns in a lot of these same Western European languages still tend to demonstrate case. Let's see if I can make that sound simpler. So, for example, I, me, for example, are different. So, I am here. I have a sister. Um, she sees me. It's not she sees I, for example. There are certain hypercorrections that people do in English today that to someone who's hyper-conscious of grammar like myself are irritating. For example, it's for me or it's for her. It could be a gift or whatever. Um, and you'll hear something like it's for her and I. This is a hypercorrection which has developed spontaneously. So a descriptivist philosophy describing how languages would say that, oh, well, this is how people are communicating today. This is just how it is. For someone who is more prescriptively inclined, one would say, well, this is incorrect grammar because one cannot say, and nor does one say, it's for I. We don't find that spontaneous. We say it's for me. Anyway, that's just sort of little bits of grammar. And of course, the opposite end would be because the reason people do that is because they don't understand necessarily the grammar isn't intuitive to them, which is fine. Grammar becomes unintuitive, certain aspects of it, naturally, with are this very natural thing to, of course, occur. But while we live in the moment, it can be irritating if we happen to be paying attention to those things. Me and her are siblings, for example, would be the more classic example. Actually, what was I the other day? Yeah, I heard people spontaneously um, use something like that. Me and her, that kind of thing. Um, Instead of he and I. And the reason is because accusative forms tend to have an emphatic nature, and accusative forms can take the place entirely of these direct object forms can take the place of subject forms. Direct object or accusative or similar concepts, and they're sometimes interchangeable. So, for example, French will say c'est moi, whereas in Italian it's sono io, and it couldn't possibly sono me in Italian, or c'est je, or je suis je. I've never seen such a thing in French, and perhaps it existed at one point. And of course, Italian uses lei and lui as objects. They originally were object pronouns, but now they're used even in nominatively very frequently because they're inherently emphatic. So these are the nature of language changes. But doesn't mean we can't. I'm just gonna say pretend to be irritated. Of course, we can be irritated by it, but that's how it is. So that's sort of an idea of what the accusative case is. The point is that the the accusative case cannot that we have to use it also for nouns. So soror is a sister, but sororen would be the accusative version. So the verb to have, for example, sororen video. I see the sister, maybe my sister. Sororen video. I don't need to say my. In fact, with family members, body parts, things that have a somewhat personal nature in Latin, as in other languages descended from Latin, we tend not to frequently put possessive words on them. We certainly can, but it's used for clarity rather than necessity. So if I say, I see the sister, it implies in English inherently that it's not mine. If I say, see my sister, that's the normal English way. I see my sister. But sorore en video, the first assumption is going to be that this is my sister, probably, depending on the context, but that's sort of how it works. So, which is nice. So we don't actually need any possessive pronouns in this lesson, and I'll see if I can succeed in avoiding it, because we're going to use the dative of possession. So that's the issue, is that if we want to say si soren video or have, sororen habeo, the problem is that this accusative form, we have to decline it. Declining, meaning we have to change the noun. When we change from I to me, that's declining. When we change she to her, that's declining. He to him, we to us, and so forth. Those are all the parts of the declension, the declined pattern of those pronouns. And of course, the pronouns do that in Latin, but also all nouns, with very few exceptions, have to undergo declination or declension as well. So sorore habeo, well, that's something we'd have to now do and think about. And you may be reasonably comfortable with Latin grammar at this point to some degree, but maybe you don't speak spontaneously yet. And you know the word soror. You know how to decline the third declension. Soror, sorori, sorori, sororen, sorore, and so forth. You can do that, but as it is with most people, which is very normal, you know the nominative form because that's the form that's in the dictionary first, right? Soror. That's very normal. So, that being the case, wouldn't it be nice not to have to decline it? Well, guess what? We can do that. Soror mihi est. And you may know that mihi, mi, these are completely interchangeable forms. Mihi, mi, you don't have to, you can use either one. If you pronounce the H, that is, if you use the classical pronunciation, mihi, mihi, mi, is simply it's almost like a contraction, like saying can't instead of cannot. It's very common. Soror mihi est, soror mihi est. So there is a sister to me, is what that is, because mihi is a declined form of meaning to me. It's the dative of I, of ego, of the pronoun ego, meaning I. So soror mihi est. There is a sister to me, which is strange, but it is idiomatically equivalent to this, sororen habeo. And that's what's so great about this. And we can also keep it super simple with this lovely little word too. This word nomine. Maybe I can pull nomine. So nomen, nomen is name, and the ablative form is nomine. The ablative is wonderful because it has lots and lots of functions. So nomine literally means by means of the name, or something like that. I mean, these words we had at the beginning with it are just ways of trying to describe it. With the name, actually that kind of works. With the name. To me, there's a sister with the name Maya. That works pretty well as a translation. Of course, I don't work in translation very much, and as a rule, I try to avoid it, especially when cultivating spoken habits in the languages that I try to speak. But with the name works pretty well as a way to understand it. So, mia soror nomine Maya. And that works pretty well, I think, to give this. So this is a great way to interact with people. Certainly we interact with people all the time, and any time when we encounter people who speak Latin, we want to, learn basic facts about each other, right? And family is obviously one of those topics that comes up. So, mi soror nomine Maya, quae habet et illa, filium, filianque, and so forth, just going on about our families. So mia soror nomine Maia. Well, let's learn some other family names, huh? So, the nuclear, I suppose, family here, the mater and pater, mother and father. So, mi est mater, nomine Rebecca. Mi est mater, nomine Rebecca. Mi est pater, nomine Robertus. Mi est pater, nomine Robertus. Soror mihi est. Est mihi soror. Obviously, word order in Latin is pretty flexible. Soror mi est. Mi soror est. Frater non est mihi. Non habeo fratre. That's the accusative version, but I'm going to try to avoid using it today for the sake of reinforcing this lovely dative of possession, because it's actually very common. Intuitively, I feel like this second one here, soror mi est, just from, we gain intuition and language from experience, right? So not merely experience limited to Latin speakers I've gotten the chance to speak with over the years, but also reading texts. This just feels more natural to me. A little. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. Can be used all the time. But soror mi est. I would dare say that it is unnatural to use such a form like this to the exclusion of this one. There's certain variety that occurs in language naturally. For example, if we were to end every single phrase or sentence with a verb in Latin, that's so unusual as to be nearly wrong. If we use this form all the time and not this one, if we don't use the dative of possession, it's not quite as wrong as using the verb always at the end of the sentence in Latin, which is just far too strange. Has anybody told you that Latin is SVO, subject, verb, object, word order, that the verb must come at the end? Because it's not true. Latin order is incredibly flexible, and getting an intuition for how we can apply that depends on whom you're trying to imitate. If you want to imitate the letters of Cicero and you want to write that way, or Plautus or any of those plays, and those are ways to gain that intuition. And when you read a whole lot of literature from the classical period, you get your own personal intuitive sense of these things, and hopefully without too much interference from our native languages, which we all have. So, mi est mater, nomine Rebecca, mi est pater, nomine Robertus, soror quoque mi est, nomine Maia, frater non est mihi. Non est mi filia, daughter, non est mi filius. Now, children, the word liberi is usually given for children. It is also possible to use filius. Latin, like quite a few languages, and I believe Old Norse and also Icelandic, though I'm not sure about Icelandic because I don't know it, is one of the few where the masculine gender isn't considered the neutral gender for human beings. Evidently, I'm not an Proto-Indo-European researcher, but my understanding is that the cause of this, like why would we use the masculine for both genders? Is that some kind of sexism thing linguistically? I would tend to think not, because the origin of this is again, I'm reporting things I've heard and read, so I'm not an expert. Your understanding may be different. But in one of the oldest Proto-European languages, Hittite, one of the oldest to branch off, there's only, as I understand it, there's only a masculine and neuter gender. There's no feminine gender. What that really means is there's something like the Latin us ending, which is applied both to men and women, and then there's something closer to say, the and the other, so forth. And it's actually is a lot like the third declension, because the third declension doesn't show gender most of the time, whether it's ancient Greek or Latin. The third declension, if we see a word like lex, we have no idea if that's going to be masculine or feminine. It happens to be feminine. So it's something a little bit like that, where this is used for both the genders, both male and female, and then something like the again, this is not actually Hittite. Sorry, it's probably bad to put that there because it seems confusing. These are just sort of my Latin way of understanding how this apparently works. So but then eventually a feminine gender develops in the Proto-Indo-European language that hasn't branched off yet, and then all the other Proto-Indo-European languages besides the Hittite branch, apparently the Anatolian branch, evidently demonstrate um, this, and which obviously there's convenience in having grammatical gender. There's also convenience in not having it. So languages develop and they create all sorts of novel and interesting ways of communicating. But evidently, this seems to be the reason, um, which whether or not there's any kind of sexism or misogynism or politics of any kind that people are either consciously or unconsciously using. No doubt that's also been a part of history linguistically. I'm not denying that. But evidently, that is the cause for the masculine plural. For example, liberi, not like libera or libera or something that would be technically neuter gender. And like I said, as far as I know, Old Norse and therefore possibly Icelandic, but I don't know Icelandic. I don't know Old Norse either, for that matter. Evidently use the neuter gender for mixed company. Interesting. So that said, it is very normal to say that. Also, it's very normal to have, so for example, siblings is fratres, right? Fratres. It's just sort of the default form. And then another way, though, which isn't as common in classical Latin, but it does exist, is simply to say figli, figli for children. This is just like Italian. Figli or Spanish hijos. Again, the masculine is used as the neutral one between the two when there's a mixed company. If one were to have children of both genders, um, in Italian and Spanish, figli, hijos, and it's not, and then therefore one has to clarify because the masculine, it's sort of what it seems to do, in my opinion, as a native speaker of English and not a native speaker of languages which have grammatical gender to the same extent as the Romance languages or Latin, is what this seems to do is it means that the masculine gender in plural does not carry the same weight it does in, say, English, where if one is able to clearly say something like I don't know, brothers or sons, it has this immediate weight of masculine, whereas not so much in other languages. I don't know if that helps. I just sort of a little bit of my worldview. The worldview. It's not my worldview at all. It's sort of a linguistic, cosmicon, sort of a view globally of not of world, but of the language. Anyway, but as far as language goes, I mean, there's a reason that probably Old Norse wanted to use a neutral gender. Maybe they did find it strange for some reason, as often English speakers do when we find that. Oh, so we use the masculine gender as the neutral one in plural. This is the language as it is in any case. So fili can be used as well, but not nearly so commonly. Liberi is more often used for children. So, pater, mater, frater, soror. Okay. Oh, yes. And neptis and nepos. Granddaughter, grandson. Neptis, nepos. And I can maybe you have one. Esne, tibi, neptis. Esne, tibi, nepos. So this is to you singular. So mihi non es neptis. Mi non es nepos. Esne tibi nepos. Esne tibi neptis. And esne tibi avia erat, there was, erat, or fuit perhaps, I'll just use erat today. Erat mi avia, erat mi avus. Erat mi pater, patris et mater matris et mater matris et pater matris. So the four grandparents. Erant mihi, sed mortui jam sunt omnes. They're all passed away. They're all dead now. Part of that. Mortus is a little bit strong. And in Latin too. So, but I'm, for the sake of simplicity, I'm using that adjective. Mortui sunt. And then great grandmother, proavia, great grandfather, proavus. Mm. So, and then there's some stuff that was different from maternal and paternal side. And this is where, certainly from an English perspective, it gets plenty confusing. At least it does to be. So, a maternal aunt or aunt is a matertera. The maternal uncle is avunculus. In fact, via French or modern French, oncle. This is where we get our word uncle, avunculus. And but patrus is the brother of the father. So the brother of the mother is an avunculus. Mi sunt avunculi, mi sunt quinque avunculi. Eugepai. Attatatai, sunt multi mihi avunculi, sunt mi quinque avunculi. Et matertera would be the sister of the mother. Et non mi sunt matertera. I want to talk about in-laws in a different episode. So, consobrina. Consobrina is as a cousin, and female consobrina or consobrinus, and so consobrinae, consobrini, suntne tibi consobrini, suntne tibi consobrinae. And on the paternal side, amita is an aunt or aunt, and the patrus is the uncle. If we want to talk about our nieces or nephews on the father's side, patruellis, singular, masculine or feminine. So masculine or feminine. And then patruelles. Patruelles, suntne vobis, I'll just use tibi. Suntne tibi patruelles, suntne tibi consobrini. Now, niece and nephew, now the words niece and nephew are actually from these Latin words ultimately. But I'm pretty sure. Let's see how it couldn't be. I haven't checked I didn't check the etymology today, and who can remember every etymology? Filia filius sororis, or filia filius fratris, niece or nephew. Later, in post-Augustan Latin, evidently, according to Lewis and Short, the great, wonderful dictionary, evidently, later on, the words for grandchild, granddaughter or grandson, neptis and nepos, come to take the place of niece and nephew, which is interesting because of Italian works that way, for example, as well as being the words for grandchildren, for grandson or granddaughter, in that language. Whereas if we want to be used, what is mostly used in Latin or classical Latin, or at least pre-Augustan Latin, filia sororis, filius sororis, filius fratris, filia fratris, niece and nephew. Mi sunt filii aut liberi, maybe I use children, mi sunt liberi sororis, mi est unus filius sororis et una filia sororis. Non mi sunt fratres. I don't have brothers. There are no brothers to me. Non mi sunt fratres, itaque non mi sunt filii fratris, quia non est mihi frater. Okay. Well, that is the basic scheme. Mi est mi est filia. Or I could even just say, I don't need to say the me part. I can just say filia sororis est Laurena, filius sororis est Loganus. That's the simple way to do it. I don't need to say me because it's a little unusual in a way because the possession is already going on through the sororis. I don't think it doesn't sound wrong. It sounds a little odd, not wrong per se, but mi est filia sororis. Seems maybe a little bit too much. But filia sororis est Laurena, filius sororis est Loganus. Anyway, the nomine I can use. So, filius sororis. I give the direct name. So, I don't need to use that part. I could also say sorori est filius, to the sister est son, is the son. Filius est sorori nomine Loganus. Filia est sorori nomine Laurena. Let's look a little bit at everybody's favorite show. I'm sure it is. Downton Abbey. Um, I certainly like it. Mi placet, Downton Abbey. Placetne, tibi? Mi placet. So, ecce. Robertus est. Roberto est uxor. Oh, I didn't put in those. Those are probably important. Uxor, wife, and maritus. Oops, right long vowel. Maritus. Uxor et maritus. And which are, in plural, conyuges. Conyuges. They are husband and wife. Spouses? No, that doesn't sound right. A couple. Doesn't sound right in English. The loveliness of language. Cora est uxor Roberti. That's the genitive case, but we can say it using the dative of possession. Cora est uxor Roberto. Roberto est uxor nomine Cora. Corae est maritus nomine Robertus. And we're not doing in-laws today. Roberto est soror nomine Rosamunda. Rosamundae est frater nomine Robertus. Roberto et Rosamundae est mater nomine Violeta. Erat Roberto et Rosamundae pater nomine Patricius. Roberto et Corae sunt tres filiae. Roberto et Corae non sunt filii, mares, masculine, male children. Sunt tres filiae. Edita, Sibylla, I'll read it today that way. Sibylla, I'm Latinizing them for the sake of simplicity. You don't necessarily have to Latinize, but I'm Latinizing them. Sibylla et Maria. Maria, Sibylla, et Edita sunt tres filiae, Corae et Roberti. Editae est maritus nomine erat male scriptum Michaelis erat maritus, nunc est maritus nomine Herbertus. Mariae erat maritus nomine Matthius, iam maritus Mariae est Hendricus. Georgius filius est Mariae. Mattaio filius est Georgius. Editae et Michaeli est filia nomine Marigolda. Et Tomae et Sibyllae est filia nomine Sibylla, etc. I hope this was helpful. I digressed a bit on the theory of, if you will, of why the masculine plural is used in adjectives and other things and as a kind of neutral plural for human beings, which evidently seems to derive from Proto-Indo-European. That's just something I'm reporting, and I haven't researched that in depth enough to really know about the topic, but hopefully that wasn't too unhelpful either, because we encounter that a lot, and ultimately it's something we have to accept when working with different languages which use that particular habit. And hopefully, if that's helpful, ultimately the practical aspect, whether or not the theory or the explanation of it linguistically is completely verified. Like I said, I haven't verified that as something I heard and read, but as I said. But ultimately, we have to accept something like, okay, liberi is masculine plural. Parentes, when we use it in plural, it's going to be masculine unless we mean only mothers, and so forth. So Hopefully, it helps us to accept the asymmetry in it. But as we saw with when I was looking at, you know, it's for him and I. Languages don't naturally develop symmetrically. They can be, in fact, pretty darn odd. I hope this was interesting and useful. And let me know in the comments if if this is helpful or if there's any particular feedback for this. And gratias.